The WWE brand split, the draft, was said to give an opportunity to make more stars than the WWE roster could handle with one show alone, and in some cases, that could be argued to be very true. However, there's some other cases where it's not so much, and that is the topic of this episode, because today... Alright, so what this video is going to be is it's going to be a list of 5 WWE wrestlers that I think really benefited from the brand split, and another 5 that I think, well, didn't. Now, I'm not going to be going in any ranked order, this is just going to be chronologically, and so with that, we might as well get started right away with my first pick, Shelton Benjamin. Now, this was the first time since WWE's initial draft in 2002 where they did this. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be using the term the draft or the superstar shakeup pretty much interchangeably. You know what I mean. So anyway, after the initial draft, this was the first time WWE sought to shake up the roster a little bit. And with that, they took Shelton Benjamin and split up the world's greatest tag team. And as such, giving Shelton Benjamin the opportunity to become a solo star over on Raw, and they did so in a very big way, with his historic victory over Triple H. Now unfortunately, Shelton never moved past the mid-card, but nevertheless, this was a huge opportunity and a big advancement in his career, and one that you could say only happened because of the brand split. Now, on the worst side of things, for the very same draft, I think there's someone on the other side who didn't fare out so well, and that would be Rene Dupree. Before Nicholas, Rene Dupree was actually the youngest person to ever hold a WWE championship, winning the tag titles as part of La Resistance at only 19 years old. However, this would be about where Rene Dupree would peak, as after moving to SmackDown and having a program with John Cena, he kind of fell into obscurity. What was originally meant to be the genesis of his singles career quickly turned into a moment that people just forgot about, pretty much the opposite of what happened to Shelton Benjamin over on Raw. And don't get me wrong, for this entry I was really tempted to go back to the initial draft, and I was actually going to say the #1 pick of, well, believe it or not, The Rock, as the People's Champion is of course a megastar. However, once they drafted him in the #1 spot, he ended up becoming an actor for Hollywood, a real part-timer that was barely there. But nevertheless, it seems weird to call The Rock a bust, so I just went with Rene Dupree instead. Oh, but don't worry, if we're gonna stick to the topic of #1s that didn't work out, we have plenty more where that came from. But before we get into that, here's the #1 that did work out, and since we were already talking about him, it's John Cena. Now, what's so important about this moment is that while John Cena was already WWE champion and was already a big star, this cemented him as the guy by bringing him over to WWE's flagship show. Just think about it. Batista won the Royal Rumble that led to WrestleMania, and John Cena's match against JBL for the title was somewhere down the card, even though it was for the WWE Championship, WWE's main title. But then, with this one simple move, WWE was able to bring their main title and their main star over to their main show, signifying that even though up until this point John Cena was being treated as a second-class champion, he was now officially the guy, and the franchise's career was never going to be the same again, and that the Cena era had officially begun. Alright, so now for my next bad pick, we're gonna go to 2006, 1 year later, and that's going to be Kurt Angle. For this round, he was sent to go to Extreme Championship Wrestling, a company that Kurt had a lot of history with, and it wasn't very good history. Now, this draft was unique because it was specifically for the ECW brand only, and there were just 2 picks, one being RVD, and the second being the Olympic gold medalist. And in case you're wondering, how could this possibly be a bad thing since Kurt Angle is just so great? And he is. The reason is because this did not sit well with him at all, as he would soon ask for his release, which was granted, resulting in him leaving the company. So if you want to talk about a bad draft choice, well, you could clearly say that Kurt Angle was draft dodging, as this was so bad it got him to leave the company. Good luck topping that. Okay, so now time for another bad one, and this would happen 1 year later in 2007, and it was the #1 pick in this year's draft, and it would be the Great Khali. That's right, he was number 1 in this draft lottery. And I get it, they were trying to represent this guy as an absolute monster. Look how big and tall and strong he is, and they were making him number 1 ahead of everybody else. But unfortunately for them, wrestling fans just aren't going to fall for that. The Great Khali was pretty much a bust all the way around, and all the lessons the WWE should have learned from this didn't really come through. And, well, we're gonna get into that again in a little bit. But now, onto a good pick. And now for an actually good choice. For me, I had to wait all the way until the second brand split, because I think they only did it right twice in the first one. And that's with Seth Rollins. Now, for those of you who followed his career, Seth Rollins was clearly the number 1 choice out of the Shield members for WWE starting back in NXT. And when he became the breakout heel, he yet again demonstrated that he was the one that WWE had their eye on the most. And even though that would eventually shift to Roman Reigns, Seth being positioned as the number 1 choice for the entire draft showed just how important he was. And so even though the Tribal Chief is easily the number 1 guy in WWE, at the same time, it's hard to deny that they didn't have a soft spot in their heart for Seth Rollins, that they were trying to position him to be another possible contender to the throne. I mean, just look at his Architect run in his feud with Triple H, and of course, well, being number 1 for the second draft. From 2016 to 2017, here we go, another number 1 pick, and a horrible one at that, with Jinder Mahal. So for those of you who may not remember, Jinder Mahal was floating around in obscurity after 3MB, that is, until Vince McMahon decided that he wanted to take another crack at trying to get Indian money. And so, with that goal in mind, Vince McMahon decided to take Jinder Mahal over on Raw after he had a match where he injured a freshly returning Finn Balor, but nobody ever talks about that. And then he would move him over to SmackDown, where he would almost immediately get a number 1 contendership match that he would win in order to take on Randy Orton and win the WWE title. Now sure, from Jinder's point of view, this was a huge boon to his career, but in all actuality, this could not be any more of a failure, as it was routinely bringing down attendance for SmackDown to the point where they had to keep AJ Styles off of TV and put him only in dark matches in the hopes that people would turn out just to see AJ Styles live, since that was their only choice. Yeah, that's something that happened. And to make matters worse, when WWE finally did their India tour, ticket sales for the second night were so bad they had to cancel it and just merge it into the first night, showcasing that audiences are not as racially driven as Vince McMahon might be. And all this would ultimately conclude when Brock Lesnar decided that he wanted nothing to do with having a match against Jinder Mahal, and so they had him drop the strap to AJ. So I never thought I'd say this, but thank you, Brock. This draft pick had one goal, and it could not have done worse at achieving that goal. It was an attempt to try and bring in a new audience, but it actually wound up costing them their pre-established audience that they already had, and it didn't even bring in anybody new. And so for that alone, the modern-day Maharaja is easily one of the worst draft picks ever in WWE. Alright, now finally onto a good one, and I do mean one, as we're going to 2019 and Becky Lynch. The man, Stone Cold Becky Lynch, whatever you want to say, this was monumental. And she topped the merchandise sales, and not just for the women, I mean for the men, for everybody. This was unprecedented. And this only cemented it by putting her at the #1 spot. Between getting the cover of the WWE video game and being the first draft pick overall in the 2019 draft, this showed just how much WWE was willing to invest in Becky Lynch, and for very good reason. Alright, and now going to one of the worst picks, staying in 2016, we have Sanity. Now, whenever an entire group is drafted, it's always a dicey maneuver, as the original draft took the fake NWO as a draft pick, and well, let's also remember Retribution. On second thought, let's not remember Retribution, because they were also picked as an entire group, and well, the less said about them, the better. However, when it came to 2016 and the second brand split, taking the entire group of Sanity from NXT and moving them onto the main roster could have been a big boon for the group. Well, not the entire team minus Nikki Cross for some reason. But ultimately, it landed them nowhere, He was a team led by Eric Young that had a lot of momentum going for it. They were a serious, threatening group over in the black and gold brand. But then on the main roster, they quickly fell apart and fell into obscurity as a bunch of relative nobodies that weren't given any memorable storylines and didn't come across as a genuine threat to, well, anyone. And this is during an era where James Ellsworth has the ability to say he beat AJ Styles as WWE Champion. How and why Vince McMahon wasn't able to do anything with this group over the main roster still to this day boggles my mind. Especially since I think EY was never really given a fair shot in WWE. And when you look at AJ Styles and to a degree Bobby Roode and Samoa Joe, all the TNA greats that came over to World Wrestling Entertainment, even if they didn't win a world title, still had respectable runs, except for Eric Young for some reason. And especially since this is when his career was pretty much wrapping up, it was a really sour note for him to go out on. One that I think his career has never fully recovered from. Alright, and let's wrap this up with a positive one of my personal favorites, Braun Strowman. Now this was on the 2019 draft. The second one, there was 2 this year for some reason. Now, up until this point, Braun Strowman was seen as just the new big guy that was part of the new Wyatt family. He was also a rosebud, but we're not talking about that. Now at this point, he easily could have just stayed the big lumbering meathead, the heavy of a group that already had Bray Wyatt, Luke Harper, and Eric Rowan in, but instead, WWE decided to bring him over to Monday Nights, where he would become a breakout star, easily getting over by flipping over a whole bunch of big things, which would of course lead to him eventually feuding with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, solidifying him as a main dude. Now sure, when he did eventually win the WWE Universal Championship off of Bill Goldberg, it did feel like a little too late, but nevertheless, this was a huge move for a huge guy who easily could have just been forgotten. Alright, there you go, my top 5 picks and my 5 bottom picks for the best and worst of the WWE brand split. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments, and please share this video, make sure people watch it, and make sure that you're subscribed right here to Dave Knows Wrestling. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my patrons, and as always, Dave Knows